Hi everyone, Brenna Cantner here with Nexus Youth and Family Services. This is our July Wellness Workshop on Mental Health 101. Really what everyone should know about mental health and breaking the stigma. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and I think it's impacting everyone's mental health on some level. And I think it's important and that we all have a responsibility to ourselves and our loved ones and the people around us to learn and have some new insight and information on mental health and how you can support, recognize signs, and really encourage yourself and others to get help if they need it, because we all might need help at times, and there's a lot of stigma around mental health too. So we're going to talk about that. So let's get going. So you might ask, what is mental health? The thing about mental health is people get it mixed up with mental health, mental illness. There's a lot of stigma around that. And so everyone has mental health, right? That's just the reality. So mental health is any person's individual, emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It's the lens that we look at the world around us. It affects how we think, we feel, how we act, and it also determines how we are able to handle stress, relate to others, and make choices, good or bad. Our mental health changes throughout our life. Sometimes it changes day to day, depending on what we have going on. So our mental health goes through different stages throughout our life. Some factors that play, into our mental health are our biological factors, so our genes, our brain chemistry, our family history, our life experiences, so any trauma, abuse, if you were in the military, if you grew up in a small town, like all of those things affect the lens that you see the world through. And I already mentioned this, but family history and mental illness as well. So there are a lot of factors, and it affects all of us. So having just defined mental health, I want to differentiate mental health and mental illness a little bit. So mental illness is associated with distress or problems in functioning in your daily life, social, work, family. It's common and it happens. What I'm focusing on today is the concept of mental health, which is something that everybody has, and not everybody has mental illness. I hope that makes sense. Mental health is important. It's something that everybody has. When your mental health is thriving, your physical body is mostly thriving as well. So if you're having challenges with your mental health, it might impact your immune system. It might impact the way you sleep. It's so connected. It's changeable, it's complex, and it's real. As a therapist, I hear so frequently from caregivers, parents, grandparents, that about teenagers, that it's in their head or they're just being dramatic, and that's such flawed thinking. Mental health is not a sign of weakness. It's not shameful. It's not just all in your mind. It's not always something negative. It's not an interchangeable term with mental illness. It's not feeling good all the time. It's not something you can just snap out of. And I think it's really important to understand the differences of what mental health is, what mental health isn't, and the differences between mental health and mental illness. So I want to talk a little about common red flags. And so when we're thinking about mental health, right, there's a continuum. So there are days where we might have bad days and we might be feeling kind of some symptoms of depression or anxiety, right? It's a continuum. So just because you are having a bad day and maybe having, or even a few bad days, right? It can be situational, where you've lost a loved one, or you've lost your job, or you're stressed out about the pandemic, right? Mental health is a continuum. And so it's important to pay attention to some of the red flags to help you understand where you're at, where a loved one might be at, and how you can help and make changes. So eating habits, if you're eating unhealthy, and when I say eating unhealthy, I don't necessarily just mean eating junk food. I mean, eating too much, eating too little, not eating at all, right? So your eating habits, sleeping habits, just loss of energy, your body, like I just mentioned, that mental health and your physical body are so connected. And so if you have a lot of physical aches and pains that are not normal for you, increase of some of those maladaptive coping things like drinking, smoking, drug use, feeling on edge, worried, scared, maybe picking fights with your family and friends, noticing mood swings, persistent thoughts that you have a hard time controlling, thoughts of harming yourself or others. And I had mentioned this before, is that inability to struggle to perform daily tasks. So like, is it hard to get out of bed in the morning? Is it hard to focus at work? So things to kind of pay attention to. And one of these things on one day does not mean that you are having mental health issues, right? It's something to be mindful of. And if you notice that you're having a hard time focusing at work for a few days in a row, maybe that's a time for some self-compassion and taking a step back and looking at what's going on and kind of evaluating maybe why and looking for the why. And the beautiful thing about mental health is that you can change it, right? You can pay attention to it and be mindful. And if you notice some negative, one of these red flags coming up for you, you can go, okay, so I'm stressed out because, right? And this is how I can make myself feel better. So having positive mental health allows people to really operate at their full potential and cope with the stressors of life in healthy ways. The reality of our world is that we have stress coming at us all day, every day, in lots of different ways, whether it's at work, at home, via the news, whatever it is. But positive mental health allows you to cope with those things in an effective, healthy way, allows you to work productively and have meaningful, healthy relationships with friends, family, or community. So some ways to maintain positive mental health is ask for help. If you are needing to talk to someone, talk to them, whether it's a friend or a professional. Reach out and look for someone that can help you. Stay connected to your friends and family, stay connected to the community, physical activity, helping others, getting a good night's sleep. I am such a huge proponent of just getting back to basics. And it might sound silly, but it's so simple that if you are struggling with sleeping or eating, or just your emotions are a little wonky, getting back to basics is so helpful. So going to bed at the same time every night, getting up at the same time every morning, making sure you're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, exercising 30 minutes a day. I can just be going for a walk or dancing in your living room, right? I'm not saying you have to go to the gym. It's about using what you have. But getting back to basics is so helpful and such a positive, easy way to maintain mental health. If you have watched any of our other wellness workshops or PowerPoints or know me at all, I'm such a huge proponent for self-care. Self-care, so important. It's getting regular medical care when you need it. It's eating healthy, exercising. I love this self-care wheel that I've included here because it talks about, physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, and all of those aspects of your life. And so when you think of your professional life, who doesn't take lunch breaks, right? So taking a lunch break, not working on holidays, taking vacations, even if it's just taking a day off, setting boundaries, asking for help, that physical component of regular medical care, eating healthy, regular sleep, exercising. All of these things are so basic, right? That back to basics, like getting back to basics and making time for yourself and the things that are important to you. And even if it's 5 minutes, It's doable, and I hear frequently, I don't have time for that. Well, you do. I mean, you could watch 5 less minutes of TV, right? It's about making time for what's important to you. And if you prioritize your self-care, I guarantee your mental health will improve in so many ways. So spending time in nature, sometimes it's just about going and sitting outside, meditating. These things don't have to be complicated. It's not, when I say spend time in nature, I'm not talking about going backpacking for 3 weeks, right? I'm talking about driving to a nearby lake. Especially in Amador County, we have so much beauty around us in short drive times, right? So you can go to the creek for 15 minutes. You can go sit outside. You could go for a walk. These things don't have to be complicated. I think it's really important to gain awareness and get the facts. And so just knowing you're not alone in this process, whether you're having significant symptoms leading towards mental illness, if you are having, just challenging emotions and having a hard time regulating those kinds of feelings because of what's going on in the world right now, you're not alone. I think everyone's struggling in different ways right now. And so being aware and getting the facts, I've included a few right here. There are so many statistics on mental health. One of the most shocking ones to me is the lack of treatment people actually get. I was recently working on a project, and we discovered that only, I think it was 7% of youth in the state of California get mental health treatment or support. And that's so crazy to me. So as you can see here, 1 in 5 American adults will have a diagnosable mental health condition in any given year. 50% of Americans will meet the criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition in the span of their lifetime. And half of those people can develop those conditions before the age of 14. Just a few small facts about mental health, but you're not alone, and it's okay to ask for help. That's my message here. If you take nothing else away from this, is it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to be in a place of just such significant depression to ask for help, right? Your feelings are valid simply because you feel them. So talking about mental health is important, whether it's talking with your loved ones, talking with friends, talking to strangers, whoever, but talking about mental health is important. And I found this little snippet on how to have a conversation about mental health. And it's important to listen without judgment and ask how you can help, how you can support and validate feelings, and listen with the intention to understand, not to fix, right? Being patient, staying in touch, even if you don't get a response, empathize. Like I mentioned before, I hear so frequently that it's mental health is so dismissed sometimes that it's all in your head. No. So don't tell people how they should feel. Don't jump in with solutions. Don't pressure them to talk. Sometimes people just need you to hear them. And so saying things like, well, you just need to, blah, 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 it's not that simple, right? It's just not. Don't give people random diagnoses. You're not qualified to do so. Don't be critical. Don't be scared to talk about feelings. We'll talk a little bit more about suicide, but some of the myths around suicide, right, is people don't want to talk about suicide because then that'll make someone do it. No. Like, that's not the reality of it. I think it's so important to talk about mental health and find out where people are at. So there's a lot of impact right now to everyone's mental health. And so just in my field, I know there's been a lot of suicidal ideation and thoughts of harming yourself. And I think it's important to talk about. And so I felt like while we're talking about mental health, it's important to pay attention to suicide because it's preventable. And so there's a lot of risk factors and kind of some warning signs of suicidal thoughts that aren't always easy to see, but it's something you can look for and pay attention to, and you can really help save somebody and help them by recognizing signs and having the conversation. It's important to have the conversation. Like I was just saying, I've heard, well, talking about it will make them do it. No, it won't. I think it's important to start the conversation. And so some risk factors are history of mental health, a recent death of a family member, previous suicide attempts, history of substance abuse, relationship issues, paying attention to where they have, if someone has access to means to harm themselves, knowing somebody's been exposed to bullying, things like that. There's a lot of risk factors. And you can pay attention of, you can hear the talking about wanting to die, reckless behavior, increased agitation, changes in sleep, sudden mood changes, anger, giving things away, withdrawal, things like that. So suicide is preventable, and it's important to pay attention to some of those warning signs and risk factors so you can have the conversation. So mental health is so stigmatized. It's oftentimes viewed as a sign of weakness. If you ask for help or are having challenges with your mental health, it's not something you're making up. And I think it's really important to pay attention to the way you say things. Your words matter. And so I kind of included here, don't say this, say that, like kind of a swap. Saying someone is crazy can say someone is mentally ill. Not using mental illness in that kind of everyday speech of like, oh, he's just so OCD, right? It's not positive. It's not a good thing to use those mental illnesses as adjectives, right? The saying you're depressed or if you've had a panic attack, if it's not true, or I hear frequently even joking, right? I mean, I hear people say it just in jest all the time of like, oh God, I just would like wish I would die, or I wish I would kill, like I'm gonna kill myself, right? That's a very real thing for people, and so it's important to not use those things in a joking kind of manner. Using the terminology around death and suicide casually. Don't undermine or put down mental illness, such as therapy, counseling, going to get like using coping skills, self-care. It's just important to pay attention to your words and the way you say things, and it matters. It matters to the people around you. It matters to your loved ones. It matters to people in the community. So it's just something to pay attention to. The really sad thing for me is that stigma is all around, and there's so many different kinds of it. So there's public stigma. So that happens when the public endorses those negative stereotypes that result in discrimination against people with mental health conditions. Self-stigma. It's when you internalize that public stigma and you don't think there's value in getting help or saying out loud that you need help. Perceived stigma, maybe just thinking that other people around you are having negative beliefs. Label avoidance, that's when someone is choosing to not seek mental health treatment to avoid getting assigned a stigmatizing label or a diagnosis. Stigma by association, it's when someone is it says it right here, so I'll just read it. I was trying to think of a different way to explain it without just reading it. So stigma by association occurs when the effects of stigma are extended to someone linked to a person with mental health. So that associative stigma. Structural stigma, it's institutional policies that result in decreased opportunities for people to get mental health treatment and services. And then health practitioner stigma. So this takes place anytime a health professional allows stereotypes and prejudices about mental illness to impact someone's care. Stigma is all around us, and it's important to kind of break down those barriers and encourage the people around you that some of it's generational, right? So that might be a perceived stigma or label avoidance, but generational or veterans, right? Like there's different cultures where mental health is perceived as a weakness. And so it's important to pay attention to those things and how they impact you and the people around you. So how can you get help for yourself or a loved one? It's important never to self-diagnose. If you have insurance, you can call and they can give you a list of providers in your area. Your primary care doctor can help rule out physical conditions because that's really important. A therapist can help you develop coping skills, and a therapist or a doctor can refer you to a psychiatrist if medication is something you're interested in or you think might be helpful, just for an evaluation. As always, I think it's really important to provide community resources. So I've included different phone numbers here for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the local crisis lines. Reach out, ask for help. It's okay not to be okay. And lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are working hard to bring lots of content that is relevant and supportive to our community during this time. Please feel free to reach out and ask any questions you might have. Take care, and I'll see you next time.